We're on the graveyard shift. I'll try not to bore you to death. Kay told me you're a very informed group of people, so I'm not going to try and not bore you with normal details, but if there's anything more specific that you would like me to explain, please just ask. I'm just going to run through a series of slides and just give you a little bit of a background on the pompom. So, ALC PHP, Plant Health Protection. We basically do biological control. We work on biological control of environmental weeds. So we don't really do the agricultural side, but more the environmental weeds. And specifically one of my projects is the much loved and hated pompom weed. So just general background again, it's basically from South America and it's been brought into the country. There's controversial, either 1960s, 70s about it's been brought in. And the map here, you'll see that the clear dots is basically the distribution of our grasslands, whereas the darker circles is actually where the pompom is actually heading for, and there's a very good collaboration between that. The pompom is a huge grassland invader, that's where it is getting its heels in. I think the biggest mistake we can ever make is just to assume that pompom is a pioneer plant. It's by no means a pioneer. It's got very well developed root structures. It's able to invade pristine grasslands, although it thrives in disturbances. And the problem in South Africa is that only 2% of our grasslands are currently being actively conserved. Most of our grasslands are either very badly deteriorated or they're beyond repair. So that's a very big concern for us because we've got a very small section of grasslands that's actually still in a pristine state, and that's why we really need to get a handle on pompom. Also, the scene in which pompom is grasslands, it's mostly farming, game farming, all of the rest. And there's constant disturbance in game farming, in agriculture, because the animals, the hooves, if it's overgrazed, there is a constant level of disturbance, and again, the pompom takes full advantage of that. So, if we just quickly look at what makes it such a good invasive plant, it's been calculated that per hectare in a monostage you can get up to 800 million seeds per hectare. That's a lot. From that, 2.5 million seedlings, and eventually you end up with about 270,000 adult plants. That's now in a monostage. Go a bit further and you look at the underground structures of pompom. I don't know if anyone has tried digging it out, but you'll see that it is a huge, vast amount of underground resources that this plant has got. So imagine now in winter, because this plant is very clever, if the soil surface were to be there, the growth tip is literally sitting just underneath the soil surface. So what happens in most of our grasslands? We get fire, we get frost, all those things. And what happens to pompom? It dies back in winter and it's just absolutely protected. So that is why you'll see these little red circles as actually secondary growth points underneath the soil surface. So as soon as you disturb the top, you'll see like there, you'll get another little shoot coming out. And that's the thing about pompom. It's a really difficult piece to deal with. So let's look at the biocontrol agents that we've got, because that's going to be the focus of my talk. The one that many of you are maybe familiar with, you would have seen it around, is the rust fungus. Now, I included under the biocontrol agents. We didn't actively bring it in. It actually came in with a plant. But its distribution is also almost everywhere we find pompom, you'll find the rust fungus. So this is just a microscopic view of it. I'm not a plant pathologist, so I'm not going to go into the detail of it. But the signs you would have seen on the leaves, you get these little reddish-brown spots. Just after we've had a little bit of rain around about December, especially around about end of January, February normally, you would see that the plants start showing symptoms like that, where you have the older leaves dying back, and yellowing of the younger leaves and eventually dying back like that as well. So that's what the rust fungus does. Now, the problem with the rust fungus is it comes in too late in the season. If we could get this beast coming in early in the season, it would do a lot more damage. But now it's dependent on rain because that's the way it actually propagates. It needs moisture. So then, for this to happen, it needs to wait for the first rains to get enough moisture for it to actually just get going. And normally we find that that's around about the same time as the pompom would start flowering, which is already fairly late in the season. So normally, some of the studies, people actually thought that the rust isn't doing that much. But the rust is very damaging to the seedlings. And also, one of our previous plant pathologists have actually found in laboratory studies that the rust actually seriously impacts on the above and the below ground mass of the plant. So that means it is having an impact. Yes, you're still seeing the plant, but there's other things working that we're not aware of. It's actually making the plant small, and it is having an impact. Okay, then we come to one of my favorite little things. It's the thrips, the pom-pom thrips. Now these little creatures, oops, daisy, let's just go back. You'll see that the little black ones is the adults and the red ones are the immatures. So what they do is they kind of feed on the new growth tips, and they will form these almost ball-like structures that they will just sit in. And they develop and they're happy, and at a certain stage when they reach like the right numbers, they will actually start dispersing and go and find more food. So you would move from a situation where you would have plants like this to where you have plants that's very pincushion-like, very small, and they're not flowering. So yeah, there's a lot that I want to say about this, because the perception on biocontrol, like what has been said, is the plant is not going to disappear. We steer away from saying we're going to eradicate. We will not eradicate. We're trying to control, we're trying to prevent further spread. So it all depends on how you define success. For me, success is if I can have the plant in the field, yes, it's still there, but it's not flowering, I'm happy, because it's not spreading. So we need to look at biocontrol differently to what you would if you look at a herbicide or manual clearing, where you literally have instant results. That's not biocontrol. Biocontrol has got a different mode. So, what has happened in Gauteng? The first time that we've released it was in 2014. These are just a quicker rundown of the numbers that's been released. You'll see the bulk has been released in Gauteng, then the Northwest, Mpumalanga, Limpopo. Nothing yet. Northern Cape will hardly ever have it. Western Cape, we've got one or two little spots where we know of it. Free State is going to get onto the map soon, I'm sure. But if the numbers that you see there, that's just, it's not including the 2022 numbers of insects that's been released. And all of this has been reared at ARC PPRI. It's basically one technician and one research assistant that's doing the work. So you can understand that if I get inundated with people that's really keen to get the insects, but we are unable to supply this at the rate that we are getting requests for insects for. The most important thing for us going forward, because thrips is a very good agent, is we want to get cultures established on individual landowner properties, on conservancies. They're really dead easy to rear. Once they get established, it's so easy to redistribute. All you do is you would use let me just go back. You'll use the infected material like that. You'll literally cut it and you'll go and reinfest other pom-pom, and you just leave it. You let it be. The warning that I do want to heed here is that if I say that you're going to start getting those kind of symptoms, you have to bank on about 6 or 7 years of have to be patient before this happens. And it really does happen. Once you get the establishment, I've seen it at the sites that we've done long-term monitoring, and I can tell you that you get excited when you see it. When you can literally go into the field and you can see there's like a whole area, there's just almost no flowers, and yet the others is just pink. So it is slow, but it really does work. Okay. The effect that it's having in the field is the normal that we normally get from biocontrol. You get shorter internodal length, the length of the plant overall is shorter. What we found with the thrips is that actually the number of buds per inflorescence has been reduced. You get the number of seeds per bud that's actually gone down, and you've got the viability of the seed within that bud has also been reduced. So, and then chaff is not everything inside the bud is always seed. Sometimes there's also a little bit of, I don't want to say rubbish, but useless little bits. And that actually increases when you have thrips damage on inflorescence, which is good because that means there's fewer seed. So on a normal pompom plant, you would find that inflorescence would be able to have 784 seeds, of which you would get about 26 seedlings, because the germination rate normally is about 33% in normal pompom. But if you introduce thrips, you actually get a 56% reduction in seedlings. So that is actually going forward. And just to look at this, there's 3 long-term sites we've been monitoring, and you can just see the trend from the time that the thrips has been introduced. So its density, stem density, has just continued going down over the years that it's been released. This again is just to illustrate to you the proportion of damage that we found in the field. We would start off with about 7, like a Biocontrol B47, and it went up to 97% of the stems that we monitor has got thrips damage on them. So you can see that there's a little bit of a decline here, but the general trend is that you're actually getting an improved state in the field. So the Biocontrol doesn't come without its challenges. The first thing is we need to get the insect established. Things that kind of hamper establishment this time is release of the insect. We need to release them early in the season where the plants are soft and you've got new growth. If you didn't, once you try and release them when it's flowering and the plants are older mature, you're hardly going to get any establishment, because that's not ideal conditions for the thrips to be in. The other thing is mass breeding. Like I said, it's the demand. Establishment also seems to be limited by things like overshadowing. What I mean here is if you have a very tall grass stand or you have a very shaded area with pompom in it, the thrips tend to not do well there. And this coincides with what we know about another Leo thrips that's been released on another invasive plant in Hawaii, and they actually found that the females oviposit less in shaded areas than in sunny areas. Okay, and then we also seem to find that soil clay content plays a role, because the thrips overwinters. So as soon as the pompom dies back, the thrips goes underground, and it seems as though higher clay soils, like when you get in wetlands and next to rivers or catchment areas, the thrips also don't seem to establish well. And then predation, of course, is the other thing. So this is what we learn once we have released an insect, but we have to quantify all of that. Luckily, we've had a PhD student from Westhuizen that has actually taken what we see and what we assumed what was happening, and he actually put it to the test. And what's interesting here, if you see the number of eggs that was laid, what he did is he had 2 plots. One he mowed to represent more sunnier areas, and the other one he left unmowed to present more shaded areas. And you'll see an enormous spike in the number of eggs that's on the mowed plots, because there's more sun and the females actually oviposit more. The same holds true for adults. There's more adults on the mowed plots, which then talks to what we actually observed in felt. And also what we found in lab studies is that there's actually more leaves on pompom plants that's been grown in sandy soils versus clay soils, which can also contribute to the amount or the number or the impact that the insects will have in either sandy or clay soils. Predation, we had first-hand experience of this the last 2 years in our own culture. It's a pirate bug that got into our culture, and trust me, one adult can eat 35 thrips a day. It was an absolute nightmare. So predation is a real threat to the thrips as well. But I also want to tell you about a new horse we've got in our stable, and some of you may have seen, but we are very proud to announce our little flower-feeding moth. This little Cacalis, we've been waiting 7 years to import it back from Argentina. It has been tested, and then we've actually done our first release. What the moth does is the female will oviposit in the flowers, hallelujah. So whichever gets away from the thrips, the moth will actually oviposit on the bracts of the flower, and we'll actually have the larvae going into the flowers, and they destroy up to 76 to 80% of the seed. So, and there's just a little, that's the little pupae. What happens to the moth is also overwintering. As soon as the plants die back, the last instar larvae will actually spin together, the last, that all brown stuff of the flower head, it will drop to the ground and it will wait for summer before it emerges again. So, our first release, and it's a very emotional release, was for Stefan Niese. I think some of you may know of Dr. Stefan Niese. He actually discovered the moth in Argentina, but he also passed away last year. So we felt that it was a tribute to Stefan for all his hard work that he's done forever for biocontrol and for saving the planet of invasive species. So the Johannesburg Mountaineering Club was actually the first people to have released this moth in South Africa, and I think it's just right to have been doing it in Stefan's stomping grounds. For the rest, we have also released in Limpopo, Gauteng, Northwest, and Mpumalanga. Unfortunately, the moth is not going to be available for general release to the public yet. Like I explained with the thrips, it's still a learning curve. We need to now see, we've released it last summer, now this past summer, we need to see if we can recover it this coming summer. And then we need to start learning more about the insect in the veld before we can actually just go ahead and distribute it more widely. So yes, that's my story. I just want to make you aware of our new book that we've got, Alien Invasive Plant Species, that Leslie Henderson has done. It's an update of a previous book. It's a brilliant book that will give you some guidance on what's available, which ones are the baddies, and what control methods is available for that specific species. So it's maybe worthwhile obtaining one if you want. I think they're about 230 Rand and you can get them from ARC. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now we know what other chochos there are out there. I actually have a request from the nursery industry for the ARC, and that is, we don't want people coming into garden centers wanting to try and kill these pests, but we have no specific way of always identifying them. So it would be nice to actually have a picturized list, and then if somebody comes in and says, no, we're not going to give you anything because we don't want to kill these. Because sometimes that's what happens, especially with things like rust fungus. As long as we can associate it with a particular plant, we can say, no, leave it alone, it's doing its job.
Yeah, we can do that. We also have an annual report that's got basically a summary of everything that's been done over the last 3-year cycle, and that should also give you, but we can compile something like that.
I think that would be great as a field to have.
Just a shorter version, yeah.
With regards to pompom, any questions? There we go. Just waiting for the mic quickly. Oh, well, let's start this side with the mics here already.
Yeah, so my question is just if we, because the public don't have access to that insect, well, no, you said we do have, but I actually found something on the website for taking out the weed, and then they said we must cut it off if we don't use biological control, cut it off above the soil, which just means it's actually not going to work if you think of that growth point.
No, yeah, you have to get that bottom, the little bit that's just underground. If you get rid of the growth point there, you sort it. You don't have to remove those fish leaves. A lot of people spend a lot of time digging them up, they can't regrow. The important bit is just that, and then you're done for it.
Sorry, just waiting for you.
It's literally just about that. You'll see that it's that little clumpy bit just under the soil, so it's before you get the fleshy roots coming out.
Liame, back from Middleburg.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to find out, you talking about the additional rearing facilities that you want to put up. Did I understand correctly?
Yes.
Conservancies, but why only conservancies?
No, not specifically privately owned land. Like if there's a group of farmers that's got a big problem, to earmark one farmer, because you need to actually kind of rear them on one piece. So whichever farmer wants to do that, then we start a rearing thing there, get them established so that within the farming community we can start redistributing. That takes the pressure off us and it actually makes it a lot faster to get the insect out at a faster rate.
Okay, but what will it cost this farmer?
Nothing. The insects are for free. you hunt them out for free, and getting it established is a fairly simple process, or getting them to potted plants to actually, it's just going to require someone to actually just look after them a bit, and just to manage and make sure the plants are watered just until the thrips actually get going, and then to actually just coordinate when to start redistributing and where it gets distributed to. So it's not just for conservancies, it's actually for big groups that's got huge infestations.
Okay, we will definitely talk.
Yes.
Because I can see in our valley how the pompom weed gets more and more every season.
Yeah.
That's the point of networking, so we find people that can come to the party and assist. Kate, we have...
The Coccidus larvae, do you understand then that it's quite vulnerable over winter to fire?
They will be, yeah. If you have a runaway fire, but the thing is like in Argentina, they've got very similar grassland conditions to what we've got, and that's also where the pompom is and where the Coccidus comes from. And we've spoken to the researchers who work there, and they say a portion of the insects will get killed once a fire goes through, but they always repopulate. So they always go back and repopulate. So once we get high enough numbers out in the field, then we'll have a system that will just repopulate. So, but that's going to, like with biocontrol, the insect thing is going to take time. But they're all more exposed and vulnerable to the thrips that go underground, but it's not a unlikely thing that they're not going to make it just because of the fire that's going to be present or a factor.
In terms of the fire management, it's better then not to burn the whole area, but to leave some refuge.
Yeah, see, once one gets to the integrated control part of it, then one would almost just have a little bit of a biocontrol reserve and just say, okay, this part, just protect it, don't burn, because that's where the Coccidus was released. But because it's a moth, they also spread a lot faster than the thrips does. The thrips is a slow disperser, whereas the moth, within me releasing them to finding, well, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, it was 300 meters away. So they actually can disperse a lot further, so that's going to buffer them, I think, a little bit more from fires going through.
Lady,
Hi, Louisa. So I just want to know, for interest's sake, these, like the thrips and the rust, do they only affect pom-poms, or won't they affect other plants, indigenous plants, and also don't they have an impact on our indigenous insects as well?
No, that's why we do so much testing with biocontrol, is we actually look at closely related plants, indigenous, of agricultural use. They're very, very specific, so they won't touch anything else.
it's very important to note that the research that goes into biocontrol is extremely extensive. And that's why it takes so long to release an agent, because of the research that needs to take place. In front?
On Jeannie.
Oh, hold on. I think it switched it off by mistake. Yeah.
I'm Jeannie from Red Cliff. Yes. With lots of pom-poms. But we did get the thrips in the very beginning.
Yeah.
But I think it was too cold for them. That's what was told to us. That it was too cold then. And what I would also like to know, there's so much there, but we work as hard as we can, but especially now when there was more rain, we pulled them, just pulled the stem out. Sometimes the roots it came out, but other times it broke off, but I think we still got that growth point out. And I see what you're talking, because if at places where it was dry and we pulled it out, it was growing again just right from that same plant space.
Yeah.
And can I just ask one more thing? Is it possible for you to come and talk to us if we get a nice group together?
Yeah, no, of course.
Yes,
No
yes.
pressure. Lots of questions.
There we go. Gentlemen to the back.
Sorry, I'm just dodging the sun. I just wanted to ask you, maybe I'm a bit lazy and I haven't done my research, but does continual mowing have a positive impact on the control of the pom-poms, or do we have to dig it out, which is obviously very labor intensive if you don't have the thrips or the rust on time?
If you continue mowing, you're just going to keep the plants in a vegetative state. so they won't flower. So it's not that bad, but just remember that you do then stimulate those secondary growth points. So should you stop, you're going to have a plant that's got a multiple flowering stems coming out. So one of the ideas of integrated control would be to actually mow early in the season and to let it regrow, and then to either use apply herbicide or to actually put Biocontrol, the thrips that really like soft new growth, to put it on. But it's a knife-edge thing. It's a very dangerous thing, because if you don't manage it after mowing or after burning, you're going to make it worse. So it's a very fine balance, and we are in the process of actually looking at how we can actually constructively integrate the different methods to actually get better results a lot quicker, because no single one of these, either chemical, mechanical or biocontrol, on its own is going to actually make a huge impact on pompom. It needs to be a combined effort, and depending on the situation. And yeah.
Last question. How do we go about applying to set up a mass rearing facility? We are not farmers, or we are not in the agricultural industry, although that's where our experience comes from. We do urban conservation, really, and we have some protected grasslands in our suburb that we manage on behalf of JCPZ. And obviously we are interested in keeping it or conserving the natural veld area.
You don't really have to apply. What I would like to suggest is that, I don't know, Kay is probably going to send out a list of the proceedings. Just email me so that I can put you on the list and specifically say to me that you are interested in actually starting up. I call it a mass rearing. It's kind of a nursery area for you, where we give you insects, we help you, we try and get it established so that you actually have infected plant material that you can start redistributing. So that's doable. You don't have to meet certain criteria to be able to do it. It's just going to require you to have someone to spend a little bit of time to actually just look after them.
Great. And it's something that we hear more and more about, integrated management. It's so important.
We do walks in the crocodile reserve, and when pompom flowers, we kind of try to pick off the heads and put up again. What we did notice is in a certain area, pompom looks deformed, and I think comparing to like an allen mine that affects the same what that is.
Actually, the thrips, because I have released there, is that if you go, it's next to the Crocodile River.
Yes.
I have done a release there, so it's very possible that it's just spread, because we actually also found it in Liame, where I've released a number of years ago, and actually in March, just as we were driving looking at something else, I just started spotting. So normally when you find those deformities, like what you explained for that's similar to the aloes, that's quite possibly scripts.
So we could then take that and transfer it to other pompons?
Yes. If you kind of just have a closer look at it and you find the little black adults or the red immatures, then you know it's definitely the thing. But if you want to email me, I'll just send you photographs of what to look for, and then maybe just compare to what you're seeing and see if it's the same.
Okay, thanks.
There we go. Okay, do we have another question? Are we done? No. No more questions. Great, fantastic. Liame, thank you so much.